Greetings, my name is Marty, and I'm currently a senior in college, majoring in linguistics. My relationship with my parents has never been perfect. They were always okay, but their love and affection were lacking. I could have accepted it if that was just their way, but it stung because I knew they were capable of being loving and supportive parents, as proven by my adopted brother, Mason. They showered Mason with more affection and attention than they ever did with me, their biological son. Don't get me wrong, I believe in giving an orphan child a loving home, but it's hard not to resent them for neglecting my emotional needs. Our differences became unbearable when I entered college. Mason was still in high school, while I had to fend for myself, covering my tuition and living expenses at the mere age of 18. Facing substantial financial challenges, I reluctantly approached my parents for help, hoping for some support. However, they coldly refused, claiming I was old enough to provide for myself. They argued that their responsibility was to make me self-sufficient, having already cared for me until high school. It felt like they had abandoned me, treating me like a mere foster child and tossing me aside when I came of age. I worked 2 jobs, struggled through my courses, and even resorted to ghostwriting and teaching language classes to make ends meet. I fought hard, but it was a constant battle. My dream was to survive until graduation, after which I planned to secure a full-time job and pause my education until I could afford it. Meanwhile, back at home, Mason lived a life of luxury. Every holiday, he received extravagant gifts, including a car, something I had begged my parents for but was denied. I saved every penny for my tuition, while he enjoyed their financial backing without a worry in the world. This year, as Mason prepared for college, my parents not only paid his tuition, but also covered all his expenses, from his dorm to his car's insurance. The disparity between their treatment of us was a harsh blow. I couldn't bear it any longer. Borrowing a friend's car, I drove home, finding their nonchalant attitude about the situation infuriating. When I unexpectedly appeared, my mother feigned concern, but it was too little, too late. The resentment I felt towards my parents and the unfairness of their actions had reached its breaking point. I could have mistaken my mother's expression for concern, but it wasn't Thanksgiving or Christmas, and she had made it clear that those were the only times I was welcome in their home. I couldn't help but confront them, asking why they were supporting Mason financially, especially after essentially abandoning me when I started college. My dad grew tense but explained that Mason's major was in music, a difficult field to find stable work in initially. They felt compelled to assist him. I had worked odd jobs and waited tables to put food on my table, majoring in linguistics. Their excuse felt hollow. That night, I told my parents that they needn't worry about setting another plate for me. They could give everything to the son they loved more. Walking away, I was crushed, unable to comprehend why they never loved me. My resentment towards Mason grew. I recalled moments when my parents had showered me with attention, taking me out to play, and my mom cooking my favorite breakfast. Then they brought Mason home, and my life changed. I resented them for adopting an orphan boy and leaving me to fend for myself. After struggling through college and years of hard work, I finally achieved the financial stability I craved. I graduated, got a car, paid my rent in advance, and saved some money. Life was tough, but it was finally good. Karma was cruel, but it also had a way of balancing things out. 3 years later, Mason called me in the middle of the night, begging me to pick him up from California while I lived in Chicago. Reluctantly, I agreed, sensing fear and sickness in his voice. When I arrived, I found him in a pitiful state, unkempt, soaked from the rain, and his eyes bloodshot. As he hugged me and began crying, I knew what was coming. He was begging for money, despite my hatred for him. His desperation almost evoked pity, but I steeled myself against it. I asked him to explain his homeless situation, but all he did was plead for money, claiming he owed it to someone who would kill him if he didn't repay. I had neither the time nor the money for this, but he was still my brother. I couldn't just abandon him. We grew up together. I had known him since he was just 3 months old. Despite my frustration, I decided to take him to my place, hoping we could discuss his situation there. He fell asleep within 15 minutes of the drive. I ended up driving him to my parents' house. The journey took about 40 minutes from Chicago. I felt it was necessary for my parents to see the result of all the money they had poured into Mason. Perhaps it was a move of both concern and retribution, but deep down, I knew I was wrong too. Upon my arrival at my parents' house around 2 in the morning, I was nervous. The last time I had spoken to them was when I confronted them about their parenting. Since then, there had been silence. Even my mother, who lived less than an hour away, never bothered to visit or check on me. But now they could see the consequences of their choices. I rang the doorbell, and it took 15 minutes for my parents to come downstairs, dressed in their robes. They glanced at me, then at Mason, who was barely aware of his surroundings. Surprise flickered in their eyes, not for Mason's state, but for my unexpected presence. They were aware of Mason's struggles with drugs. I brought Mason inside, laying him on the living room couch, and then explained the situation to both of them. They looked pained. I was about to leave when my mother stopped me, insisting I stay for some coffee. Despite the palpable tension, I decided to stay, compelled by a desire to understand the complexities of the situation with Mason. We sat at the kitchen table, and my mom began explaining the situation. Apparently, Mason had dropped out of college, and a year later, he joined some trouble, or rather, trouble caught up with him. The authorities called Dad, informing him that Mason had damaged campus property and had to pay for it. My dad did pay, but he was deeply disappointed. He confronted Mason, urging him to come home and enroll in a community college, at least completing his education before finding work. However, Mason refused and tried to sever ties. Then, the worst happened. Some thugs came to our house, threatening my dad that they would harm Mason if their money wasn't returned. Dad paid them off, attempting to bring Mason home, but he fled. 2 days later, they found him in California, where he had fallen into drugs. My mother began to cry at this point, revealing that they had placed him in a rehab facility in California 4 months ago. That was the last time they had seen him before I brought him back home. I had no immediate solution to offer, so I left, but I can't deny that I felt a strange sense of relief when both my parents hugged me and invited me to dinner this Thanksgiving. I wondered if I was wrong for feeling a twisted sense of joy over my brother's downfall. Not the whole. I wouldn't even blame your brother. It's your parents who are at fault. They've driven a wedge between their sons due to their misguided parenting. You helped your brother, which shows you're a good person. Well, your brother's life is in ruins, and you're happy that your mother wants to invite you for dinner. It might seem petty and mean, but I'd say you're not the whole if you can't understand the concept of empathy. My dad and stepmom have way too many kids, and I, a 15-year-old female, have a biological sister who is 13. We also have 7 adopted siblings, 3 boys and 4 girls, most of whom have some issues. Living with them is like walking on eggshells. This story centers on Abby, the oldest of the adopted kids at 15. They just took Abby in a few months ago, and they're in the process of adopting her. Before Abby, my dad and stepmom claimed they were done fostering and adopting kids. However, they made an exception because 2 of the girls they adopted 3 years ago are Abby's biological sisters. I have to say, Abby is probably the most challenging among the adopted kids. She doesn't talk much when we're all together. She just sits next to my stepmom or one of the nannies. She's also quite possessive about her things. For instance, if she has a pack of cookies and I eat one, she won't touch them anymore and will look for something else to eat. The same goes for video games. She enjoys playing Minecraft and will let us join her. But if we mess with anything she's built, the entire world becomes ruined for her. To address her eating habits, my dad and stepmom put a snack bar in Abby's room because there are days when she won't leave her room and sometimes won't allow anyone in. They hope this will encourage her to eat on those days. I once checked out Abby's room when she was in therapy, and noticed she had a stash of really good snacks in there. She's also a music enthusiast and owns a collection of headphones, including AirPods Pro, AirPods Max, two different kinds of Bose headphones, and another kind that I can't identify. Abby came with one of the Bose headphones, but the rest were gifts for my dad, stepmom, and their family. She's constantly obsessed with having her headphones on and ensures they're always charged. One day, Abby, my stepmom, and my sister were hanging out in my dad's room. I needed headphones but couldn't find mine, so I ventured into Abby's strictly off-limits room, an area accessible only to my stepmom and one of the nannies. I borrowed her AirPods Max and grabbed a fruit roll-up and a bag of cookies from her snack bar. I intended to charge the headphones and return them once I was done using them. When Abby discovered someone had been in her room, she threw a tantrum. It took my stepmom and the nanny the entire day to calm her down. They eventually found out I had entered her room and tried to reprimand me. I felt Abby was overreacting, and if anything, she should be the one facing consequences for her tantrum. In response, they attempted to ground me. Feeling unfairly treated, I called my mom and explained the situation. She came to pick me up to avoid my grounding due to Abby's outburst. Now, my dad is upset with me for breaking the rules and going to my mom to escape punishment. I wanted to know if I was in the wrong. I messed up. I was in the wrong. It's apparent now, Abby might be autistic or might have suffered from abuse in her past. There's a reason her room is off limits, a reason she acts the way she does. What's worse, it seems like she's never done anything to warrant such casual disregard for her boundaries. If I were your dad, I would insist you stay at your mom's until you're ready to apologize and accept your grounding. I would also extend the grounding for playing the card of going to your mom's to avoid punishment. You're the one at fault here. Foster kids, especially when new to a family, can be very difficult, struggling to adapt. That doesn't make you or her a bad person. However, what makes you wrong is going into her room, knowing it's off limits, stealing, not borrowing her things. You know she won't use things that others have used, and you went behind everyone's back to get what you wanted. Shifting gears, my mother passed away last year, and we're nearing the end of the legal process in just a few weeks. Over the past 6 months, my husband has been eyeing a range of things that, on a regular day, we definitely cannot afford. Normally, he'd have to use credit or save for weeks or even months. It's fine to wish for things or work towards treats, but he hasn't made an effort to save for these costly purchases. Instead, he's been pressuring me for updates on the legal process and asking how much longer it'll take. I've given him very little to no information because, at this point, things could still change significantly. Creditors might emerge, claiming money is owed, and so on. He's not the most responsible person with money. I've managed our finances full-time for the past 3 years because he has a history of sabotaging our financial goals and blowing our budgets. My plan is to use half of my inheritance to move our family into a house. I intend to save 40% to help my children in the future for their graduations, college, trips, or their first cars, and maintain a small emergency fund. This was something we couldn't do before because my husband kept giving money to his side of the family, depleting our accounts and leading us to homelessness 3 separate times. I understand the importance of helping family, but it's difficult for me to grasp the idea of allowing my 3 children and wife to become homeless just because an adult family member can't be responsible enough to pay their own bills or stay out of legal trouble. I fear waking up one day to find out that every cent of my inheritance has been spent behind my back. I would like to open an account in my name and proceed with the plan I mentioned earlier. My husband has made it clear that he intends to spend the money on new vehicles, tech gadgets, and other items solely for himself, not for our children or to secure our family's future. When I discuss investing or saving for our children's future, he dismisses it, claiming life is too short for such considerations. His response is that our children should work for what they want when they become adults, which seems contradictory given his recent actions. I'm certain that if his parents pass away, we'll be responsible for paying off their debts and covering any unknown costs out of our own pockets. Financially speaking, I started my marriage completely debt-free, and I've worked hard for years to help my husband achieve the same status. However, in the past decade, he has paid off his parents' credit card and IRS debts. They live paycheck to paycheck and believe saving money is pointless. I'm not sure if I'm making the right choice, but I simply want my children to experience the same happy and stress-free childhood I had. Am I in the wrong here? Not the whole. Seek legal advice to set everything up in a way that prevents him from having any claim to the money. Open a separate account without his name on it, and avoid putting his name on the house deed. Regarding the debts of his parents, if you are in the U.S., you won't have to pay them. It comes out of their estate. And if there's no money in the estate, it doesn't come from your family's funds. You might consider lying to him about the amount and the timing, telling him it's a fraction of the true amount and that it will take 2 years to receive. This would give you time to figure out how to safeguard the money from his impulsive spending. Consult a lawyer soon, as nothing prevents him from opening new credit cards and charging extravagant purchases with the intention to pay them off using your inheritance.